USMC Captain jokingly asked a woman her call sign, until Sticky 6 made him freeze. The mess hall was loud, the kind of noise that felt safe, until a single question cut through it. A Marine captain laughed as he asked a woman her call sign, expecting amusement, not consequence. But when she finally answered, the entire room seemed to stop, as if the air itself remembered something he didn't. The question wasn't meant to be cruel, not at first. It was tossed across the table with the kind of lazy swagger that grows in places full of routine. Captain Mason Hale leaned back in his chair, boots planted wide, sleeves rolled up with surgical precision. The two lieutenants beside him were already grinning, waiting for the punchline. "Ma'am," he said, voice carrying through the clatter of metal trays, "with all due respect, what's your call sign?" He didn't look directly at her at first. He didn't have to. She sat alone at the end of their long table, wearing a simple charcoal gray sweatshirt instead of a uniform, eating her lunch with the unhurried calm of someone with nowhere urgent to be. A civilian, he assumed. Maybe someone's spouse. Maybe a contractor who wandered into the wrong dining facility. Her silence made the question funnier to him, or at least he thought so. The lieutenants chuckled. She didn't. Only then did he look at her fully. Dark hair pulled back in a low twist, jaw sharp with quiet focus, eyes set not in irritation but in something steadier, almost unreadable. She chewed. She swallowed. She set her fork down with careful grace, as if every motion mattered. Captain Hale missed almost all of it. All he saw was a woman out of place in a sea of uniforms. Someone who, in his mind, didn't belong unless proven otherwise. "You know," he added, leaning forward, "everyone around here has a call sign. Pilot thing. So what's yours?" For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Not her hands. Not her breath. Not even the room. Then she looked up, and the stillness around her felt suddenly intentional. Her eyes met his with an unsettling steadiness. There was no embarrassment, no timid smile, no flustered apology, the things he expected. Just an even, level gaze that made Hale feel like he had stepped somewhere he didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Were you speaking to me?" The lieutenant smirked. Hale sat up a little straighter, sensing a challenge disguised as innocence. "I asked your call sign," he repeated, louder this time. "We're Marines. We use those. Or are you just here to listen to someone else's war stories?" A few chairs away, someone glanced up. Then someone else. Little ripples of curiosity, spreading outward. Still, she didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on a napkin, folding it neatly. There was something about the precision of her movements, something familiar, but Hale dismissed it. Her sweatshirt, faded from too many washes, shifted as she leaned back. Over the back of her chair was a jacket he hadn't bothered to look at. A sage-green flight jacket, the kind worn by aviators, but he assumed it was thrift store surplus, a souvenir knocked around by someone who liked the look of military gear. He would learn later how wrong he was. "Mason," she said quietly, reading his name tape with ease, "I'm just trying to eat my lunch." She didn't call him captain. Didn't apologize. Didn't offer an explanation for her presence. The confidence in the omission irritated him instantly. Hale stood abruptly, the scrape of his chair echoing louder than intended. A few conversations froze. "All right," he said, voice firm but threaded with something sharper now. "This mess hall is for authorized personnel. If you're supposed to be here, show ID. If not, I need you to come with me." Her expression didn't change. But something in the room did. Most people would have argued, or panicked, or at least reached for a wallet. She did none of those things. Instead, she looked down at her tray, as if deciding whether to take one last bite before dealing with the mess in front of her. Her fingers rested on the edge of the plate, a pause filled with history he couldn't see. "My ID," she said at last, "is in my jacket." Hale gestured impatiently. "Then go get it." Her gaze flicked toward the flight jacket draped casually over the back of her chair. It had a single patch on the right breast, threadbare from time and sun. A stylized numeral, a streak of smoke, a bent rotor blade dripping oil. Hale didn't even glance at it. His irritation blinded him, narrowing his world to rank, rules, and the need to assert control. She let out a soft breath, one that didn't sound angry. It sounded tired. Deeply, bone-level tired. The kind carried by people who had spent years in places others only read about. "If you'd like," she said, "you can grab the jacket yourself." It was an invitation wrapped in warning, but he didn't hear it that way. "Oh no," he snapped. "I'm not touching some novelty patch you bought online." One of the lieutenants swallowed hard. The other suddenly found the ceiling interesting. Something about her tone, her posture, had shifted the atmosphere into unknown terrain. Still, Hale pressed. "Ma'am, you're coming with me. Now." She studied him for a long, almost sorrowful moment. Not pity, recognition. She'd met this kind of man before. The kind who assumed he understood the room simply because he held rank in it. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. Hale leaned closer. "That's so." Her fingers finally moved. She reached slowly for the jacket, lifting it with care, revealing the patch fully to the room. Someone across the hall gasped. The gasp came from a staff sergeant passing by, his tray tilting until mashed potatoes slid off the side. Hale whipped around, annoyed, but the sergeant wasn't looking at him. His eyes were locked on the patch, wide, startled, almost reverent. Hale frowned. "What?" "It's just..." But the sergeant had already stepped back, spine straightening instinctively. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. The room's chatter dimmed in waves, the way sound does before a storm. People were turning. Pilots, maintainers, Marines of every stripe, pulled by some invisible thread toward the woman holding the jacket. Hale felt the shift but didn't understand it. She slipped the jacket on slowly, as if reclaiming something she'd set aside for just a moment. The collar settled around her neck. Her posture changed, quietly but unmistakably, as though she had stepped back into the skin of who she truly was. She zipped it halfway, revealing the patch fully. A worn emblem bearing 2 black letters and a name stitched beneath. "Sticky Sick." Hale blinked. The name sounded familiar but distant, like a rumor heard during training and discarded as myth. Something about a mission gone wrong. A chopper that shouldn't have survived the valley it flew into. A pilot who refused to leave wounded operators behind. But those were stories. Old ones. Exaggerated ones. She met his gaze again, calm as ever. "This enough ID for you?" Hale opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wasn't scared, just confused, adrift in the sudden shift of authority he didn't understand. Behind him, a chair scraped. A master gunnery sergeant stood slowly, eyes trained on her with reverence usually reserved for battle flags. His voice broke the tension like a single match in a dark room. "Ma'am, permission to confirm your call sign?" The master gunnery sergeant's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a steady weight that silenced even the metal clatter from the kitchen. Hale turned, expecting the older Marine to rescue him from embarrassment. Instead, the man approached her with deliberate steps, his lined face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. She didn't shift, didn't shrink, didn't grandstand. She simply nodded once. "Confirm," she said quietly. He swallowed, eyes dropping to the patch, then back to her face, as though comparing a legend to reality. "Sticky 6, he asked. For a moment, just a fraction, her expression softened. Not pride, not nostalgia. Something heavier. A memory brushing the edges of her composure. "Yes, Gunny," she said. "That was me." The words traveled through the mess hall like a tremor. A few Marines stood instinctively. A corporal whispered something that made the air tighten. Someone else muttered, "No way, she's real?" Hale watched the scene tilt away from him, slipping out of his control. Authority, his authority, felt suddenly paper-thin. Gunny Cole's chest rose and fell with something like awe. "Ma'am," he said, straightening to full height, "we thought you were." She raised a hand gently. A story, she finished. Most days that's easier. The lieutenants beside Hale weren't smirking anymore. One looked nauseous. Hale forced himself to speak. Okay, what is this? Someone explain. Who the hell is? Captain, Gunny Cole said sharply, turning to him. You need to stop talking. It wasn't disrespect. It was warning. Hale bristled, but before he could respond, a new sound cut in, a sharp triple beep from the overhead speaker. The kind used only when leadership needed immediate attention. A voice followed, clipped and urgent. All officers and senior enlisted, stand by. Base commander en route to East Mess Hall. Heads turned. Umbrellas of silence settled over tables. Something far bigger than Hale's pride had just entered the room. The announcement washed over the room like a cold wave. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum differently. Marines straightened instinctively, uniforms crisping beneath invisible command. For a moment, nobody breathed. Captain Hale felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. The base commander? For a misunderstanding over a civilian? This was getting ridiculous. But no one else looked confused. They looked alert, tense, like they all suddenly remembered something he didn't. Sticky 6. He repeated the name in his head, trying to place it. It tugged at some dusty memory from the basic school, something whispered between instructors about joint operations in bad terrain. A story used more for caution than inspiration. But he'd never paid attention. It sounded like a legend for a different branch. A pilot with impossible instincts. A rescue that defied protocol. A call sign that stuck because she kept returning, even when her own aircraft was bleeding hydraulic fluid. But that couldn't be this woman. She didn't look like a myth. She looked human. Too human for the silence that followed her. She remained seated, hands folded, shoulders relaxed despite the dozen stares anchoring onto her. Her calm was unnerving, not arrogant, not timid, just certain. Certain of her place, even if no one else had known it a moment ago. Gunny Cole didn't take his eyes off her. Ma'am, he said quietly, the colonel will want to see you. I figured, she replied gently. Her tone wasn't nervous. If anything, it was saddened, like she'd hoped to pass through unnoticed, just for one meal. Just for one moment of ordinary. Hale felt a twinge then. Not fear, not yet, but the uneasy sting of realizing he had misread the whole situation from the very beginning. And now the highest-ranking man on the base was on his way. Because of her. The doors at the far end swung open before anyone could prepare. Colonel Abrams strode in, not rushed, not frantic, but with the clipped, heavy-footed purpose of a man who had been interrupted only twice in his career. Both times it had changed something. His sergeant major followed, expression carved from stone. Conversations died mid-sentence. The colonel's eyes scanned the room with surgical focus, pausing only when they reached her. The quiet woman in the gray sweatshirt. Sticky 6. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Recognition mingled with disbelief, then something gentler beneath that. Relief? Respect? Gratitude? Hale couldn't tell. He only knew that the colonel did not look at anyone else with that kind of history in his gaze. Major Reyes, the colonel said, voice resonant but softened around the edges. I didn't know you were on this coast. Reyes. The name hit the room like a dropped wrench. Hale's stomach sank. He'd heard that name, too. In passing. A briefing slide during officer training. A female Air Force pilot embedded with Marines for a joint rescue mission in the Karengal years ago. A mission that went sideways. A bird that shouldn't have made it home. A pilot who chose to circle back under fire because 2 Marines were still alive on the valley floor. He remembered the instructor's voice, low, reverent. They said she flew with a hole in her hydraulics the size of a fist. Sticky 6 kept that chopper in the air by willpower and prayer. He remembered laughing under his breath. A story like that wasn't real. But the colonel, his colonel, didn't look like he was greeting a myth. He looked like he was greeting someone who had saved parts of him he'd never speak out loud. Major Reyes rose slowly, a quiet dignity unfolding with each inch she straightened. She didn't snap to attention. She didn't salute. She simply nodded, an acknowledgement rooted deeper than rank. "Colonel," she said softly. The sergeant major beside him cleared his throat, stealing a measured glance at Captain Hale. The kind of look senior enlisted used when watching a young officer learn a very painful, very necessary lesson. The colonel exhaled, shoulders easing. "It's good to see you standing," he said. "Last I heard, you were out of the cockpit." "I am," Reyes replied. "Just here to visit an old friend on base." Something in her voice dimmed when she said friend. A shadow passed behind her eyes. Quick, but not quick enough to hide from anyone paying attention. The colonel's jaw tightened. "Which one?" She hesitated. Gunny Cole, who had been silently absorbing every detail, stepped forward just an inch. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, who are you here to see?" Reyes's fingers curled slightly at her side. "Corporal Jacob Weller," she said finally. A ripple of recognition passed through the room. Weller. The young helicopter mechanic who had died last year. Not in combat. Not in a blaze of heroism. A training accident. One of those quiet tragedies that hardly made paperwork outside the squadron but left holes in hearts for years. Hale remembered attending the memorial. He didn't know the kid, but he remembered the folded flag, the mother clutching it like a lifeline. He remembered thinking some losses were too ordinary to be fair. Reyes's expression was made of the same quiet ache. "I owed him a visit," she murmured. "I didn't expect to cause all this." She gestured faintly to the room, still frozen around her. But the colonel shook his head. "Major," he said softly, "you being here, that's not a problem." His eyes flicked to Hale. "But what happened before we arrived is..." Captain Hale felt every pair of eyes shift onto him like a weight. Not angry, not mocking, just waiting to see how he'd respond. Judging the measure of him by how he would handle this kind of mistake. He swallowed hard. "Sir," he began, The colonel lifted a hand. "Before you explain, Captain, I want to hear from Major Reyes." A cold, sinking feeling spread through Hale's chest. Reyes didn't speak immediately. She looked down at her hands, then at the jacket she had reluctantly put back on. When she finally met the colonel's gaze, her voice was steady. "Captain Hale asked for my ID," she said plainly. He wasn't wrong. He followed protocol, just a little too eagerly. A few Marines shifted, knowing understatement when they heard it. "He assumed I didn't belong," she continued, "and he made that assumption loudly. But I didn't correct him right away." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Hale, not sharp, not accusing. Just honest. "That's on me," she said. "I should have shown my credentials when he asked the first time. I didn't because," she paused, searching for the right words, "because sometimes it's exhausting to explain yourself before you're allowed to exist in a room." The colonel's expression softened, but Hale felt the words cut deeper than any reprimand. Reyes continued, voice quieter. "Captain Hale wasn't trying to humiliate me. He just didn't know who I was." Then, like a blade sliding between armor plates, she added, "And I didn't want to be sticky six today. I wanted to be just Elena." Her name seemed to echo, even the lights buzzing overhead felt too loud around it. Gunny Cole blinked, his voice rough. "Ma'am, some people don't get to be just anything. Not after what you did." Reyes didn't look proud. She looked like someone who had spent years trying to outrun her own legend. The colonel stepped closer, his boots thudding softly against the linoleum. "Major Reyes," he said, voice carrying authority but wrapped in something gentler, "you don't owe anyone an explanation. Not here." Reyes drew a small breath, steady but edged with fatigue. "I know, sir. But I didn't come to be recognized. I came to sit where Weller used to sit. That's all." A quiet murmur rippled through the Marines who'd known the young corporal. They looked at her differently now, not just as a legend but as someone grieving with him. The colonel nodded, emotion flickering behind his professional composure. "He talked about you," he said quietly. Said he trusted you with his life. Reyes's jaw clenched gently. He trusted everyone who kept that bird running. We don't fly without the hands that fix what we break. Silence settled, tight and respectful. Then the colonel turned toward Hale. And the room braced. Captain Hale, he said, tone shifting from gentle to firm, you acted within the boundaries of regulation. But the spirit of leadership isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about recognizing the human being in front of you. Hale's throat tightened. Yes, sir. You saw a civilian, the colonel continued. You didn't see the possibility of more. You didn't pause long enough to ask instead of assume. Hale felt the sting of the words, sharp but deserved. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the colonel wasn't finished. You owe Major Reyes your respect, he said. But more importantly, you owe her a lesson learned. Hale nodded, swallowing hard. Understood, sir. Reyes watched him calmly, not triumphant, not resentful. Just present, as if waiting to see who he would become after this moment. The colonel stepped back, the tension easing. Let's give her some space, he ordered quietly. Marines shifted aside, forming a respectful path for her. But Reyes didn't move yet. Instead, she turned to Captain Hale, her expression unreadable, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. You weren't wrong, she said. Just incomplete. And something about that, something unbearably kind, hit him harder than any reprimand ever had. For the first time since the confrontation began, the room exhaled. Marines returned to their meals in small, hesitant motions, but no one's attention truly left her. Even when they pretended not to look, they listened, subtle, sideways, reverent. Reyes sat back down slowly, her tray untouched. The steam rising from her food curled upward like a faint ghost. She seemed smaller now, not physically, but in the way someone looks when the world has pressed them into a shape they never asked to hold. Captain Hale lingered nearby, unsure if approaching her would be respectful or intrusive. His upbringing screamed one thing, his training screamed another, his conscience something else entirely. It was Gunny Cole who broke the stalemate. He moved to the table deliberately, not asking permission but offering presence. Ma'am, he said, voice softened by years of watching Marines stumble toward humility, if you want some quiet, I can clear this end. Reyes shook her head faintly. No, Gunny. Quiet's not the problem. What is? He asked. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her tray. Being seen only for the moments I survived, not for the years I've lived since. Cole nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of it 1 ounce at a time. We don't forget the things you did, he said. But maybe we forget that you're still here, trying to live like the rest of us. Reyes's eyes softened. Exactly. Behind them, Hale approached carefully. Major, he said quietly, I'd like to talk. If you're willing. She tilted her head, studying him. This young officer trying desperately not to repeat the mistakes of a moment ago. Then sit, she said gently. Talking begins with showing up. And so he did. Hale settled across from her, hands folded like a cadet awaiting a board. He had replayed his earlier words 100 times already, each repetition sharper than the last. Reyes watched him with patient stillness, neither encouraging nor discouraging, only offering space for honesty. Hale cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said. Not because of rank. Because of assumption. Reyes didn't speak immediately. She let silence stretch, not to punish but to allow truth to sit where pride usually lived. Finally, she nodded. Assumption is human, she said. The damage comes when we refuse to correct it. I didn't refuse, Hale insisted gently. I just pushed too hard before I understood. That's the part that stung, she admitted. Not the request. The certainty behind it. He nodded, accepting the blow. I see that now. Reyes leaned back, studying him more thoughtfully. You're not a bad officer, Captain. You're just early in the journey. Rank comes faster than perspective sometimes. Hale let out a slow, humbling breath. If you're willing. I'd like to learn from this. You already are, she said. Gunny Cole sat a few seats away, listening without intruding. His expression carried a faint smirk, a Marine's quiet approval when someone took their lumps without whining. Reyes continued, her voice reflective. The Air Force taught me to follow procedure. The Marines taught me to trust instinct. But combat taught me something else entirely. What's that? Hale asked. That you never know who you're speaking to, she said softly. So lead every conversation with respect. He absorbed the words, feeling them settle deep, a lesson he knew would follow him far beyond this cafeteria. And for the first time since she walked in, Reyes offered a faint, gentle smile. The tension of earlier began to dissolve, replaced by something steadier, a fragile bridge forming between them. Hale found himself asking questions he hadn't expected. Why don't you want people to call you Sticky Six? He asked quietly. Reyes's expression tightened, but not unpleasantly, more like someone confronting a memory with two edges. Because that call sign belonged to a version of me that didn't think she'd live long enough to have a life afterward. Hale blinked. I thought call signs were prideful. A badge. For some, she said. For others, they're a gravestone you kept outrunning. Cole's jaw tightened at that, but Reyes continued. During that mission, she said, voice low, I made decisions I still question. I broke protocol. I endangered my crew. And I got 2 Marines home alive, but not everyone made it. Her hands tightened around each other. The Corps turned the story into legend. The Air Force turned it into paperwork. And she exhaled. I turned it into a weight I didn't know how to carry. Hale felt the air shift. The myth suddenly had scars, shadows, contours that hadn't been visible through the fog of stories. Is that why you left flying? He asked. Reyes nodded. After a while, the cockpit felt more like a punishment than a calling. Hale swallowed. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, she replied. Hero stories rarely include the cost. Cole looked away, giving her privacy even within the openness of her honesty. Reyes's gaze softened as she looked back at Hale. I'm not running from who I was. I'm just trying to meet who I'm becoming. And today, that didn't include being Sticky Six. Hale nodded slowly. Then I won't call you that, he said. She smiled faintly. Thank you. The cafeteria had mostly returned to normal rhythm, voices rising, forks scraping, distant boots echoing down halls, but around their table, time moved slower. More intentional. The sergeant major approached then, carrying something Hale didn't expect. A folded patch. Reyes lifted her eyes. You kept that? The sergeant major nodded. Found it the day they pulled your bird back to the hangar. Figured it wasn't mine to discard. She took the patch with careful hands, her old unit insignia, worn at the edges, still carrying dust from a valley halfway across the world. She stared at it as though it were a photograph of someone she once knew. Hale watched the moment with reverence he didn't fully understand. Was this closure? Recognition? A letting go? Reyes brushed her thumb along the fabric. Sometimes I think about going back, she admitted softly. Then I remember the version of me who wore this, and I'm not sure she exists anymore. The sergeant major's voice was rough. Ma'am, you don't have to be who you were. What you did is enough. She gave a small, grateful nod. I know. I'm just learning that being enough doesn't have to mean being exceptional. Hale glanced at her. Most Marines struggle with that, too. Trying to live beyond a moment everyone else defines us by. Reyes looked at him with quiet surprise, appreciating the unexpected wisdom. The sergeant major stepped back, leaving her to sit with her thoughts. She placed the patch beside her tray, not claiming it, not rejecting it, simply acknowledging its place in her story. Thank you, she whispered, more to the room than any one person. And for the first time all morning she felt like she belonged, not for who she had been, but for who she had become. When the colonel returned, the room straightened, but this time the energy was different, less tense, more human. He approached the table with the steady calm of a man who had seen battles fought both on the field and within the soul. "Major Reyes," he said, "I spoke with the front office. If you're comfortable, we'd like to escort you to Weller's Memorial Wall." Reyes's breath caught, a flicker of gratitude softening the lines of her face. "I'd like that," she murmured. The colonel nodded, then looked to Hale. "Captain, you'll accompany us." Hale blinked. "Yes, sir. Of course." Reyes didn't object. Instead, she offered him a small, almost reassuring glance, as though giving him permission to continue the lesson he had begun. They rose together. Conversations quieted respectfully as they walked through the cafeteria. No one saluted, no one gawked. They simply stepped aside, acknowledging her not with awe but with understanding. The corridor toward the memorial was lined with photographs, plaques, echoes of names spoken in briefings and prayers. Reyes walked slowly, each step heavier with memory, yet steadier with acceptance. When they reached Weller's frame, she stopped. Her fingers hovered just above the glass, trembling with a grief she had carried privately for far too long. "He was good," she whispered. "Better than he knew." Hale swallowed the lump in his throat. "He'd be proud you came." Reyes's eyes glistened, but she didn't hide it. "I hope so." The colonel gave her a moment. No orders, no timelines, just silence. When she finally stepped back, her shoulders were lighter, not with relief but with release. She turned to Hale, offering a nod that held the weight of forgiveness and the spark of something like mutual regard. "Thank you," she said. And he knew she meant, for seeing her. Truly. Elena Reyes left the base quietly, no legend, no call sign, just a woman honoring a promise. Yet something had shifted behind her. A lieutenant humbled, a unit reminded, a story reclaimed by the one who lived it. Some heroes return unnoticed. Others come back to finally be seen.